When 16-year-old Alexander Jordan disappeared from his $50 million penthouse overlooking Manhattan's Central Park, his billionaire CEO father, Henry Jordan, mobilized private investigators, hired security firms, and offered a $1 million reward for information. What Henry never expected was to find his son 3 months later, living happily in a cramped basement apartment with Rosa Martinez, the 62-year-old janitor from Alexander's elite private academy. But the shocking truth Henry discovers about why his son chose a mop closet over a mansion will expose family secrets that challenge everything he believed about success, love, and what it truly means to be wealthy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the gleaming towers of Meridian Financial District, where glass and steel monuments to capitalism pierce the clouds like crystal spears reaching toward heaven, Henry Jordan's corner office sits on the 67th floor of the prestigious Blackstone Tower. From his floor-to-ceiling windows, the world spreads below like a carefully orchestrated chess game, where every move represents millions of dollars in market fluctuations. At 45, Henry commands one of the nation's most successful venture capital firms, Apex Ventures, with assets under management exceeding $12 billion and a reputation for identifying breakthrough technologies before they reshape entire industries. His mahogany desk, larger than most people's bedrooms, holds 3 computer monitors displaying real-time market data from global exchanges, a collection of signed first-edition business books from legendary entrepreneurs, and a single framed photograph of his late wife Catherine, whose radiant smile seems to watch over every high-stakes decision that has built his empire. The photograph was taken during their honeymoon in Tuscany 15 years ago, when their biggest concern was choosing between wine tastings and art galleries rather than managing portfolios that could influence national economies. But this morning, Henry stares past the market data and corporate reports toward the prestigious Whitmore Academy, visible in the distance like a fortress of educational excellence surrounded by manicured lawns that cost more to maintain than most families earn annually. Whitmore Academy, where tuition exceeds $60,000 per year and waiting lists include the children of presidents, celebrities, and tech moguls, where his son Alexander should be attending advanced placement courses designed to prepare tomorrow's leaders for positions of global influence. Instead, Alexander's empty seat in advanced economics class represents the most expensive mystery Henry has ever encountered. 3 months ago, his son simply vanished from their penthouse without explanation, leaving behind designer clothes worth more than luxury cars, custom-built computers equipped with cutting-edge technology, and access to trust funds that could finance small countries. The disappearance came without warning, without argument, without any indication that their relationship had deteriorated beyond normal teenage rebellion against parental expectations. Henry's world operates according to principles that have never failed him. Superior resources solve complex problems, strategic thinking overcomes obstacles, and money provides access to solutions that talent and determination alone cannot achieve. His approach to finding Alexander reflects these core beliefs. Private investigators with former FBI experience. Security consultants who locate missing persons for Fortune 500 executives. Technology specialists who can track digital footprints across multiple platforms and geographic locations. Yet 3 months of professional searching has produced nothing more substantial than expensive invoices and reports filled with dead-end leads. Alexander seems to have disappeared as completely as if he never existed, leaving behind no digital trail, no financial transactions, no communication with former friends who remain as puzzled as their parents about his sudden departure from their shared world of privilege and predetermined success. The mahogany conference table in Henry's private meeting room bears witness to increasingly desperate strategy sessions with crisis management specialists, family therapists, and former law enforcement officials who specialize in runaway cases involving wealthy families. Their combined expertise costs more per hour than most people earn per month, yet their collective advice amounts to variations on themes Henry finds unacceptable. Wait for Alexander to return voluntarily, consider that he might not want to be found. Examine family dynamics that could have motivated his departure. Sometimes, Dr. Patricia Whitfield, a family psychologist whose client list includes Hollywood royalty and political dynasties, suggested during their last consultation, children from extremely privileged backgrounds feel overwhelmed by expectations and seek authenticity in environments that seem more genuine than their family circumstances. The suggestion implies criticism of Henry's parenting approach that he rejects intellectually while struggling to dismiss emotionally. His memories of Alexander's childhood reveal no obvious trauma, no signs of unhappiness that would predict such dramatic rejection of everything Henry has worked to provide. Birthday parties with entertainment budgets exceeding small weddings. Summer vacations to European destinations where private jets eliminated travel inconveniences. Educational opportunities that most families could never imagine accessing. But lately, Henry's recollections carry undertones that previously escaped his attention. Alexander's increasing reluctance to attend social events with children from similar backgrounds. His preference for spending time with household staff rather than participating in activities designed to build networks among future leaders. His questions about how their housekeepers, drivers, and security personnel live their lives outside of serving the Jordan family's needs. The irony weighs on Henry with increasing pressure as market closing approaches and another day passes without progress toward finding his son. He built Apex Ventures by identifying potential that others overlooked, by recognizing value in companies and technologies that conventional wisdom dismissed as too risky or unconventional. His professional success emerges from understanding people and situations better than competitors who rely on traditional analysis rather than intuitive insight. Yet he cannot solve the mystery of his own son's disappearance using the same analytical frameworks that built his fortune. Alexander represents the one investment that matters more than all others combined, the only legacy that transcends quarterly earnings reports and market valuations. Without him, Henry's success feels hollow, like accumulating points in a game whose purpose he's forgotten. The city lights begin illuminating Manhattan's landscape as evening approaches, transforming the view from his office windows into a glittering display of human ambition and achievement. Somewhere in that vast urban maze, Alexander is building a new life that deliberately excludes everything Henry represents. The knowledge haunts every business decision, every social interaction, every moment of solitude, when market distractions cannot mask the reality that wealth means nothing without family to share its benefits. Tomorrow, Henry will continue the search using resources that most people cannot imagine accessing. But tonight, he sits alone in his corner office, surrounded by symbols of unprecedented success, wondering how the most important relationship in his life became the one problem that money cannot solve. Before we dive deeper into this shocking discovery that will change everything Henry believed about his son and himself, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story intrigues you, make sure you're subscribed, because the truth about what Alexander found in that basement apartment will challenge everything you think you know about wealth, family, and what children really need to thrive. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Jordan penthouse spans 8,000 square feet across the top 2 floors of Manhattan's most exclusive residential tower, where each room costs more than most people's homes, and every detail reflects wealth that transforms living into an art form. Italian marble floors imported from quarries that supplied the Vatican stretch beneath hand-painted ceilings, commissioned from artists whose works hang in the Louvre. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame Central Park like living paintings that change with seasons, weather, and time of day, creating a private museum where nature serves as decoration for those wealthy enough to own views that money cannot truly purchase. But this morning, as Henry moves through rooms designed by internationally acclaimed architects, the space feels more like a mausoleum than a home. Alexander's bedroom remains exactly as he left it 3 months ago, a shrine to teenage affluence that now mocks every expensive gesture Henry believed demonstrated paternal love. The custom gaming setup worth more than luxury cars sits untouched, its multiple monitors dark and silent. Designer clothes still hang in walk-in closets larger than most apartments, organized by seasons and occasions that Alexander will never attend. Textbooks from Whitmore Academy's Advanced Placement program rest on his mahogany desk beside acceptance letters from Ivy League universities that arrived after his disappearance, opportunities that most students would sacrifice anything to receive. Henry's daily routine has transformed into a ritual of hope and disappointment that begins before dawn and extends past midnight. He reviews security footage from their building's cameras, searching for clues that professional investigators missed during previous examinations. He examines Alexander's laptop and phone records for digital breadcrumbs that might reveal his son's thinking during the weeks before his departure. He studies family photographs taken during happier times, looking for signs of unhappiness or discontent that escaped his attention when preventing them might have been possible. The photographs tell the story of a father who confused providing with parenting, who believed that expensive experiences could substitute for emotional availability. Caribbean vacations on private yachts, where Henry spent most of his time managing business calls while Alexander explored islands alone. Ski trips to exclusive Swiss resorts where the most meaningful conversations occurred between Alexander and ski instructors rather than with his father. Birthday celebrations in five-star restaurants where Henry invited business associates and their children, creating social networking opportunities rather than intimate family moments. Catherine's absence permeates every corner of their shared life, though she died 5 years ago when Alexander was 11. Her battle with cancer lasted 18 months, during which Henry struggled to balance maintaining his business empire with supporting his wife through treatment that ultimately failed, despite access to the world's best medical care. Those final months revealed the limitations of wealth when confronting mortality. When private hospitals and experimental treatments proved powerless against cellular rebellion that ignored financial resources and social status. After Catherine's death, Henry threw himself into work with desperate intensity, building Apex Ventures into an even more successful enterprise, while telling himself that securing Alexander's financial future justified his increasingly long hours and frequent business travel. He hired the best nannies, enrolled Alexander in the most prestigious schools, and provided access to opportunities that money could purchase, believing that superior resources would compensate for the emotional availability that grief and guilt made difficult to provide. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield Drive, Patricia Whitfield's aunt and Henry's longtime housekeeper, witnessed this transformation from the perspective of someone who understood both the family's grief and the gradual distance that developed between father and son. At 58, Mrs. Whitfield had worked for the Jordan family since Alexander was born, watching him grow from curious toddler to increasingly isolated teenager who spent more time talking with household staff than with his father. "Mr. Jordan," she said during one of their increasingly frequent conversations about Alexander's behavior before his disappearance, "that boy needs his father more than he needs another trust fund or private tutor. He asks questions about everything: how I learned to cook, what my childhood was like, why I chose to work for wealthy families instead of having children of my own. He's hungry for real conversations about real life, not lectures about stock portfolios and business strategies." Her observations stung because they contained truth that Henry struggled to acknowledge. His conversations with Alexander had indeed become increasingly focused on academic achievement, college preparation, and career planning, rather than the kinds of personal discussions that build emotional connections between parents and children. He measured success through Alexander's grades, test scores, and acceptance into exclusive programs rather than through happiness, curiosity, or the development of authentic relationships with peers who valued him for reasons beyond his family's wealth. The irony haunted Henry during sleepless nights when business problems seemed trivial compared to the mystery of his son's disappearance. He spent his professional life analyzing human motivation, understanding what drove entrepreneurs to take risks, what made consumers choose specific products, what convinced investors to trust their money with particular strategies. Yet he couldn't decode the motivations of the person who mattered most, couldn't understand what would drive Alexander to abandon comfort and security for circumstances that Henry couldn't even imagine. Alexander's few close friends from Whitmore Academy provided no useful insights during carefully orchestrated conversations that Henry arranged through their parents. James Wellington III, whose family owned shipping companies that operated on 6 continents, described Alexander as increasingly withdrawn during their final months at school together. He kept asking weird questions. James reported with the casual dismissiveness of someone who had never questioned his own privileged circumstances. Like, how much money did we think our family spent on things we didn't really need, and whether we ever talked to people who weren't rich? Similar reports emerged from other classmates, painting a picture of Alexander becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the assumptions and expectations that defined their shared social environment. He questioned why their school's scholarship students were treated differently, why household staff weren't included in family celebrations, why their conversations focused exclusively on acquiring more wealth rather than using existing resources to help others. These behavioral changes, which Henry had dismissed as normal teenage idealism that would fade with maturity, now seemed like warning signs that he should have recognized and addressed before they motivated such dramatic action. Alexander hadn't run away impulsively. He had been planning his departure for months, carefully observing and questioning the world Henry provided, while developing alternative ideas about how life could be lived. The most painful realization emerged from examining Alexander's internet browsing history, which revealed months of research into homelessness, poverty, and social inequality that existed beyond their insulated world of privilege. He had studied volunteer opportunities, read articles about income disparity, and watched documentaries about families struggling with problems that money could easily solve. His searches suggested someone developing social consciousness that conflicted with inherited assumptions about wealth and responsibility. But understanding Alexander's motivation didn't reveal his location or provide strategies for convincing him to return home. Henry faced the growing possibility that his son's disappearance represented permanent rejection of everything their family represented, that Alexander preferred unknown hardships to the comfort and security that Henry had sacrificed everything to provide. Meanwhile, 15 miles away in the Riverside district, where subway trains rattle through underground tunnels and sirens provide the soundtrack to urban survival, Alexander Jordan sits at a small kitchen table in Rosa Martinez's basement apartment, carefully budgeting their combined weekly income of $847. The notebook before him contains handwritten calculations that would shock his father, not because of their complexity, but because of their necessity. Rent, $420. Groceries, $180. Utilities, $95. Transportation, $67. The remaining $85 must cover everything else: laundry, household supplies, emergency medical expenses, and the small luxuries that make poverty bearable rather than merely survivable. This mathematical exercise represents freedom in ways that trust funds and investment portfolios never could. For the first time in his 16 years, Alexander understands the true cost of living, the weight of decisions, where choosing one necessity means sacrificing another. When Rosa works double shifts cleaning office buildings from midnight until dawn, Alexander manages their household budget with precision that his expensive private education never taught him, stretching every dollar through careful planning and creative problem-solving that poverty demands but privilege prevents learning. Rosa Martinez discovered Alexander 3 months ago during her evening shift at Whitmore Academy, where she has cleaned classrooms and maintained facilities for 8 years without most students learning her name or acknowledging her presence. At 62, Rosa possesses dignity that wealth cannot purchase, and wisdom that formal education cannot provide. Her English carries the musical accent of someone who learned the language as an adult, who chose to build a new life in a country that offered opportunity in exchange for hard work and cultural adaptation. Here, that October evening when Rosa found Alexander sleeping in the school's supply closet, surrounded by expensive belongings that seemed incongruous with his chosen hiding place, she faced a decision that revealed everything about her character. She could have called security, contacted administrators, or simply pretended not to see the obviously wealthy student who had somehow ended up homeless in her workplace. Instead, she offered him coffee from her thermos and listened to his story with the patience that comes from understanding that everyone carries burdens invisible to others. "Mijo," she said after Alexander explained his desperate need to escape a life that felt suffocating despite its material advantages, running away is easy. Building something better takes courage and hard work. You want to learn what real life looks like? You can stay with me, but you follow my rules and contribute like family, not like a guest who thinks poverty is an adventure. Her conditions were non-negotiable. Alexander would attend public school under an assumed name, work part-time to contribute to household expenses, learn to cook, clean, and maintain their shared living space without complaining about accommodations that lacked the luxury he was accustomed to. Most importantly, he would treat their arrangement as permanent commitment rather than temporary rebellion, understanding that Rosa's generosity came with expectations about respect, responsibility, and genuine contribution to their partnership. The transition challenged everything Alexander believed about his own capabilities and character. His first week in Washington Heights High School, where metal detectors screen students for weapons and textbooks are shared among multiple classes due to budget constraints, revealed educational disparities that his privilege had hidden from view. Teachers struggled with class sizes exceeding 40 students while managing disciplinary problems that private schools eliminate through selective admission and unlimited resources. Yet Alexander discovered learning opportunities that Whitmore Academy's individualized attention couldn't provide. His classmates possessed street intelligence, practical skills, and cultural knowledge that his elite education had ignored. Maria Santos, whose family operated a small grocery store while she maintained a 3.8 GPA despite working 20 hours weekly, taught him more about economics through real-world experience than his advanced placement courses ever had. Marcus Thompson, who repaired computers to help pay his family's rent while studying for SATs without expensive tutoring, demonstrated problem-solving abilities that transcended formal education. His part-time job at Delgado's restaurant, where he washes dishes and busses tables for $12 per hour, introduced him to workplace dynamics that his previous experience couldn't have prepared him for. The kitchen staff, composed primarily of immigrants working multiple jobs to support families both locally and internationally, operates with efficiency and teamwork that corporate boardrooms could never achieve. They taught Alexander that dignity comes from honest work regardless of pay scale, that respect must be earned through competence and character rather than inherited through family wealth. Rosa's evening routine became Alexander's education in values that money cannot purchase. After completing her custodial shifts, she prepares simple meals that transform basic ingredients into satisfying dinners through techniques learned from her grandmother in El Salvador. She listens to Spanish-language radio programs that connect her to cultural heritage while planning weekend visits to neighbors, who rely on her assistance with translation, small repairs, and emotional support during crises that government services cannot address. Real wealth, Rosa explained during one of their kitchen conversations while teaching Alexander to make pupisas from scratch, is having people who need you and whom you can depend on when life gets difficult. Your father has money, but does he have neighbors who would check on him if he didn't come home? Does he know how to fix a broken pipe, or comfort a crying child, or make a meal that brings a family together around one table? These questions challenged assumptions that Alexander had never examined, revealing the isolation that wealth creates when it separates people from communities where mutual dependence builds authentic relationships. His former life now seemed artificial, insulated from realities that most people navigate daily without the safety nets that money provides. But Alexander's commitment to this new life faced constant internal conflict between his idealistic motivations and the harsh realities that Rosa's neighbors confronted daily. When Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow living upstairs, couldn't afford prescription medications for her diabetes, Alexander struggled with the knowledge that his family's petty cash could solve her problem instantly. When Rosa worked despite fever because missing shifts meant unpaid bills, Alexander wrestled with guilt about the trust funds that could eliminate her financial stress permanently. Rosa recognized these struggles and addressed them with characteristic directness. You want to help? Learn to help the right way. Money fixes problems temporarily, but teaching people skills, connecting them to resources, advocating for better policies, that creates lasting change. Your privilege can become a tool for justice, but only if you understand what justice looks like from the bottom up. Her guidance transformed Alexander's perspective from guilt about inherited advantages toward understanding how privilege could serve purposes larger than personal comfort. He began volunteering at the community center where Rosa taught English classes to recent immigrants, using his educational background to tutor children whose parents worked multiple jobs while pursuing their own studies. He helped elderly neighbors navigate social services, translate documents, and complete applications for assistance programs that bureaucratic complexity made nearly impossible to access without help. This work provided meaning that his previous life had lacked, purpose that extended beyond accumulating achievements for college applications or building resumes that impressed admissions committees. He discovered fulfillment in contributing to his community's well-being, rather than simply preparing for individual success in competitive environments where cooperation was discouraged and empathy was considered weakness. The phone call that changes everything arrives at 6:43 a.m. on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning, interrupting Henry's methodical review of quarterly investment reports that normally command his complete attention. Detective Carmen Rodriguez from the Manhattan Missing Persons Unit speaks with the professional detachment that comes from delivering news that families have waited months to receive, though her tone carries undertones suggesting this particular case defies normal categories of resolution. "Mr. Jordan, we've located your son," Detective Rodriguez announces without preamble, understanding that wealthy clients prefer directness over diplomatic cushioning of significant information. "He's alive, healthy, and living in the Riverside district. However, The circumstances of his situation are unusual. He's been staying with Rosa Martinez, a custodial worker from his former school, and he appears to be there voluntarily. The relief Henry feels lasts approximately 15 seconds before Detective Rodriguez's additional details create confusion that transforms gratitude into bewilderment. Alexander has been attending public school under the name Alex Rivera, working at a local restaurant, and contributing to household expenses in a basement apartment that costs less per month than Henry's weekly dry cleaning bills. Most puzzling, Alexander explicitly told investigating officers that he has no intention of returning home and considers his current living situation permanent rather than temporary rebellion. We cannot compel him to return against his will. Detective Rodriguez explains with the careful legal precision that protects police departments from lawsuits involving wealthy families whose problems exceed normal enforcement protocols. He's 16, appears well cared for, shows no signs of coercion or abuse, and clearly states his preference to remain where he is. Ms. Martinez has provided documentation showing she's filed for temporary guardianship through proper legal channels. This revelation strikes Henry with force that quarterly profit reports and market fluctuations never could. Rosa Martinez, whose name appears on Whitmore Academy's custodial staff records but whom Henry has never personally encountered, has legally positioned herself as Alexander's guardian while he was hiring private investigators to search for clues about his son's whereabouts. The irony burns with particular intensity because Henry's business success depends on identifying opportunities and threats before competitors recognize their significance, yet he failed to notice that the solution to his most important problem existed within his own sphere of influence. The drive to Riverside District requires navigation through parts of Manhattan that Henry's previous experience has avoided, neighborhoods where his Tesla Model S attracts attention for reasons beyond automotive appreciation. Street vendors sell fresh fruit from wooden carts that operate without corporate oversight or regulatory compliance. Children play in small parks where playground equipment shows signs of heavy use and municipal maintenance budgets that prioritize function over aesthetics. Corner bodegas display handwritten signs in Spanish and English, serving communities where personal relationships matter more than brand recognition or marketing strategies. Rosa Martinez's apartment building stands 5 stories tall, with fire escapes that create geometric shadows across brick facades weathered by decades of urban seasons. The entrance door requires visitors to navigate a security system consisting of multiple buzzers, intercom communication with residents, and social protocols that Henry's isolated lifestyle never taught him. When Rosa's voice crackles through the intercom speaker asking for identification and purpose of visit, Henry realizes he's encountering the first person in months who doesn't automatically recognize his name or defer to his social status. "I'm Alexander's father," Henry says into the metal speaker, words that feel simultaneously natural and completely inadequate for describing the complexity of relationships that brought him to this moment. "I'd like to speak with both of you, please." The silence that follows his request stretches long enough for Henry to question whether the intercom system functions properly, whether Rosa heard his introduction, or whether she's consulting with Alexander about whether to grant him access to their shared living space. Finally, the door's electronic lock disengages with mechanical clicking that sounds like permission granted reluctantly rather than welcome extended enthusiastically. The building's interior reflects maintenance standards that prioritize essential functions over cosmetic appeal. Painted walls show scuff marks from moving furniture through narrow hallways. Fluorescent lighting creates harsh illumination that reveals details wealthy neighborhoods conceal through superior design and unlimited renovation budgets. The stairwell leading to Rosa's basement apartment requires careful navigation of steps worn smooth by decades of foot traffic, each landing marked by apartment doors that represent individual stories of urban survival and community building. Rosa Martinez answers her door with dignity that economic circumstances cannot diminish and authority that doesn't depend on wealth or social position. At 62, she possesses presence that commands respect through character rather than intimidation, intelligence that formal education cannot diminish or validate. Her apartment, though smaller than Henry's walk-in closet, demonstrates organization and care that transforms limited space into functional home, where every item serves multiple purposes and nothing is wasted. Alexander emerges from the apartment's single bedroom wearing clothes that Henry doesn't recognize, simple jeans and t-shirt that cost less than his former weekly allowance, but somehow make him appear more mature than designer outfits ever did. His posture shows confidence that doesn't depend on external validation, comfort in surroundings that provide emotional security despite lacking material luxury. Most striking, his expression reveals peace that Henry hasn't seen since Catherine's death, contentment that their penthouse's expensive amenities never produced. "Hello, Dad," Alexander says, with politeness that maintains distance while acknowledging relationship. His tone carries no anger or resentment, but also no enthusiasm for reunion or indication that he misses their previous life together. "Rosa said you'd probably find us eventually. I'm glad you're here because there are things we need to discuss." The formal quality of this greeting shocks Henry more than Detective Rodriguez's phone call had. This isn't the emotional reunion he'd imagined during months of searching. The grateful son returning to comfort and security after discovering that independence involves hardships that privilege prevents. Instead, Alexander speaks like someone who has carefully considered his position and prepared for negotiations between equals rather than parent and child. Rosa gestures toward her small kitchen table where 3 chairs wait as if she had anticipated this confrontation and prepared accordingly. "Mr. Jordan," she says with respectful directness that acknowledges his social position while asserting her own authority in this space, "your son has something important to tell you. But first, you need to understand that he's not the same boy who left your house 3 months ago. He's learned things about himself and about life that money can't teach, and those lessons have changed how he sees everything, including his relationship with you." Henry settles into the offered chair, aware that this basement apartment represents territory where his usual advantages, wealth, influence, legal resources, provide no leverage for compelling cooperation or compliance. For the first time since building his business empire, he faces a situation where success depends entirely on his ability to listen, understand, and respond to perspectives that challenge fundamental assumptions about how the world operates and what children need from their parents. The kitchen table conversation begins with Alexander's calm announcement that shatters every assumption Henry has maintained about their relationship and his role as a father. "Dad, I'm not coming home," Alexander states with quiet certainty that carries no room for negotiation or compromise. "This isn't teenage rebellion or a phase I'll outgrow. I've found something here that our life together never provided, and I'm not willing to give it up for comfort and security that feels empty." Henry's initial response emerges from instincts developed through decades of corporate negotiations, where superior resources and strategic pressure eventually produce favorable outcomes. "Alexander, this is ridiculous," he says, his voice carrying authority that typically ends discussions before they become arguments. "You're 16 years old, living in a basement apartment, working at a restaurant for minimum wage, attending a public school that can't possibly match the educational opportunities I've provided. This fantasy of poverty isn't sustainable, and you're throwing away advantages that most people would sacrifice everything to access." But Rosa Martinez interrupts this familiar pattern of paternal dominance with directness that Henry's social circle would never dare employ. "Mr. Jordan," she says firmly, "your son asked you to listen, not to lecture. If you want to understand why he chose this life over yours, you need to hear what he's discovered about himself and about you. But if you're here to drag him back to a world that made him miserable, you can leave now and save us all the time." Her intervention creates tension that transforms their small kitchen into a courtroom where Henry faces judgment from perspectives he's never been forced to consider. This isn't a boardroom where his wealth commands deference, or a social gathering where his status ensures respect. Rosa's apartment operates according to different rules where character matters more than credentials, where authenticity trumps achievement, and where Henry's usual advantages provide no leverage for controlling outcomes. Alexander continues with explanations that reveal months of careful observation and analysis that Henry never suspected his son possessed. "Dad, do you know the names of any of our housekeeping staff besides Mrs. Whitfield? Have you ever asked Tomas, our driver, about his family or what he does when he's not working for us? When was the last time you had a conversation with someone who wasn't wealthy, who couldn't provide business connections or social advantages?" These questions expose isolation that Henry had never recognized as limitation, revealing how wealth creates barriers that prevent authentic human connection. His social interactions occur exclusively within circles where everyone shares similar economic circumstances, educational backgrounds, and professional aspirations. His charitable giving flows through foundations and tax-deductible donations that create distance between himself and the people his money theoretically helps. I've learned more about real life in 3 months with Rosa than in 16 years in our penthouse, Alexander continues, his voice gaining strength as he articulates insights that months of shared experience with poverty have provided. I know what it feels like to worry about rent, to choose between buying groceries and paying for medicine, to work hard for money that barely covers necessities. But I also know what it means to be part of a community where people help each other without expecting profit or recognition. Rosa supports Alexander's explanations with examples that demonstrate the mutual aid networks that poverty creates out of necessity. When Mrs. Patterson upstairs needed emergency medical care but couldn't afford ambulance transportation, neighbors organized carpools and shifted work schedules to ensure she received treatment without creating financial catastrophe. When the Delgado family's restaurant faced closure due to equipment failure, community members contributed labor and resources to complete repairs that commercial contractors would have charged thousands to perform. Your son has been part of these efforts, Rosa tells Henry with pride that transcends economic measurements of success. He's helped elderly neighbors navigate social services, tutored children whose parents work multiple jobs, translated documents for families who speak limited English. He's learned that wealth means nothing if you don't know how to contribute to something larger than yourself. Henry struggles to process these revelations because they contradict fundamental beliefs about success, achievement, and parental responsibility that have guided his entire adult life. His sacrifices to build Apex Ventures emerged from determination to provide Alexander with opportunities that his own middle-class childhood had lacked. Every business decision, every long workday, every missed family dinner was justified by the security and advantages his success would create for his son's future. Alexander, you don't understand the real world. Henry responds with frustration that emerges from seeing his life's work dismissed as meaningless. This community you're romanticizing exists because people lack resources to solve their problems independently. When you need medical care, legal representation, or educational opportunities, you'll discover that good intentions don't replace financial capability. I have built something that can protect you from the hardships these people face daily. But Alexander's response reveals perspective that months of lived experience have created, understanding that Henry's protected lifestyle has prevented him from developing. Dad, you've protected me from everything except loneliness, isolation, and the knowledge that my life serves no purpose beyond accumulating more advantages for myself. Your wealth solved my material problems while creating emotional and spiritual poverty that money can't fix. Rosa recognizes that this conversation has reached the crucial point where understanding becomes possible, or permanent estrangement becomes inevitable. Mr. Jordan, she says with the wisdom that comes from observing human nature across decades of service to wealthy families, your son isn't rejecting you personally. He's rejecting a way of life that separates people from authentic relationships and meaningful work. The question is whether you're willing to examine why a 16-year-old boy chose poverty over privilege, community over comfort. The challenge Rosa presents forces Henry to confront possibilities that his worldview has never accommodated, that wealth might create problems rather than solve them, that privilege might limit rather than expand human experience, that his definition of success might be fundamentally flawed. Alexander's choice to live in Rosa's basement apartment isn't teenage rebellion, but mature judgment about values and priorities that Henry's education and experience never taught him to consider. If you want your son back, Rosa continues with directness that cuts through corporate diplomacy and social politeness, you need to understand what he's found here that your world couldn't provide. But understanding requires more than listening to explanations. It requires experiencing what he's experienced, seeing what he's seen, feeling what poverty and community actually mean for people who can't escape them through trust funds and business connections. Her words present Henry with an impossible choice: maintain his assumptions about superiority of wealth and lose his son permanently, or challenge beliefs that define his entire identity by entering a world where his achievements mean nothing, and his character faces evaluation according to standards that money cannot influence. Henry's response to Rosa's challenge surprises everyone in the small kitchen, including himself. Instead of rejecting her conditions or attempting to assert parental authority through legal threats, he finds himself saying, "What would I need to do?" The question emerges from desperation that transcends pride, from recognition that conventional approaches have failed completely, and from growing awareness that his relationship with Alexander depends on understanding experiences that his privileged lifestyle has made impossible to imagine. Rosa studies Henry's face with the careful attention she applies to evaluating whether people mean what they say or are simply telling her what they think she wants to hear. Years of working for wealthy families have taught her to recognize the difference between genuine curiosity and performative interest designed to achieve specific outcomes. "You would live here?" she says finally. "In this apartment, with this income, following the same rules that Alexander follows. 1 week. 7 days of experiencing what his life actually looks like, instead of what you assume it must be." The proposal seems absurd to someone whose daily decisions typically involve millions of dollars and international business relationships. Henry's week usually includes board meetings where quarterly profits are measured in hundreds of millions, charitable galas where single donations exceed Rosa's annual income, and social events where casual conversations can influence stock prices or political policies. The idea of abandoning these responsibilities to play house in a basement apartment strikes him as both impractical and potentially damaging to business relationships that require constant attention and immediate responses. But Alexander's expression reveals something Henry hasn't seen since Catherine's death: hope. Not the manufactured optimism that expensive gifts or exclusive opportunities had briefly produced, but genuine anticipation that meaningful communication might become possible between them. This glimpse of emotional connection that Henry has been seeking for 3 months makes Rosa's challenge impossible to refuse, regardless of practical complications or professional consequences. 1 week, Henry agrees, understanding that this commitment requires more than scheduling adjustments or delegation of responsibilities. "But I need to make arrangements for essential business matters that can't be postponed or handled remotely." Rosa's smile carries approval mixed with skepticism. "Mr. Jordan, that's exactly the attitude that needs to change. Poor people don't get to postpone their responsibilities when life becomes inconvenient. You'll discover that real emergencies don't wait for business schedules, and survival doesn't accommodate professional priorities." The next morning begins Henry's education in realities that 3 decades of wealth accumulation have insulated him from experiencing. Rosa's alarm clock sounds at 4:30 a.m., not because she enjoys early mornings, but because her cleaning shift at Whitmore Academy begins at 5 a.m., and public transportation requires 45 minutes that private drivers eliminate for people who can afford them. Henry discovers that waking before dawn without the assistance of household staff who prepare breakfast, organize daily schedules, and handle communication with drivers creates logistical challenges that money has always solved invisibly. The subway journey to Manhattan teaches Henry about transportation systems he's never needed to understand. Rosa explains the complex network of transfers, timing considerations, and backup plans required when mechanical failures or weather delays can make people late for work without acceptable excuses. "Rich people think poor people are lazy or unreliable," she observes while they wait for a delayed train, "but they've never tried to coordinate 3 different jobs with public transportation that breaks down regularly." At Whitmore Academy, Henry experiences his former son's elite educational environment from Rosa's perspective, seeing familiar halls through eyes that notice details wealth renders invisible. The marble floors that symbolize institutional prestige require constant maintenance that Rosa provides while students walk past without acknowledging her presence. The state-of-the-art technology that demonstrates educational excellence creates electronic waste that Rosa manages while teachers focus on curriculum delivery rather than environmental impact. "Your son was the only student who ever asked about my work," Rosa tells Henry while they clean classrooms that cost more to maintain than most families spend on housing. "He wanted to know how the cleaning supplies affected my health, whether I had insurance for work-related injuries, if my salary covered living expenses." Questions that showed he saw me as a person rather than a service. Henry begins to understand why Alexander developed social consciousness that their privileged environment had never fostered. Whitmore Academy's mission statements emphasize global citizenship and social responsibility, but the institution's structure separates students from the people whose labor makes their education possible. Alexander's relationship with Rosa emerged from genuine curiosity about human experiences beyond his social circle, leading to conversations that revealed disparities his classmates never noticed. The afternoon shift at Delgado's restaurant provides Henry with his first experience of hourly wage labor, where income depends on continuous productivity rather than strategic decision-making or investment management. The kitchen operates with efficiency that corporate boardrooms could never achieve, each staff member performing multiple roles while maintaining quality standards that customer satisfaction demands. Miguel Delgado, the owner, manages inventory, finances, personnel, and customer service simultaneously while working longer hours than most CEOs without the safety net of wealth that makes business failures recoverable. Alexander fits in here because he works without complaining, Miguel explains while teaching Henry to wash dishes with speed that prevents backup during dinner rush. He doesn't think he's too good for any job, doesn't expect special treatment because he's smart or educated. That attitude is rare among young people, especially ones with his background. Henry struggles with tasks that require physical stamina rather than intellectual analysis, discovering that restaurant work demands skills his MBA education never addressed. The coordination required to maintain pace with experienced staff while meeting hygiene standards and safety protocols challenges his assumptions about the complexity of labor that society undervalues economically. By closing time, his hands show blisters that executive work never produces, his back aches from standing for 8 hours, and his respect for people who perform this work daily has increased exponentially. The evening return to Rosa's apartment reveals the final component of Alexander's new life: community relationships that provide emotional support without financial transactions. Neighbors gather in the building's small courtyard to share dinner prepared collectively from ingredients that individual families contribute according to their means. Children play games that require creativity rather than expensive equipment, while adults discuss challenges and solutions that affect everyone's daily survival. Henry observes Alexander's integration into this community with amazement that his son demonstrates social skills that elite education never taught him. Alexander translates documents for Mrs. Chin, helps elderly Mr. Rodriguez navigate Medicare paperwork, and organizes homework assistance for children whose parents work evening shifts. These activities provide fulfillment that volunteering for prestigious charities had never produced, purpose that emerges from direct service rather than philanthropic distance. "This is what I was looking for," Alexander tells his father as they prepare for sleep in Rosa's small living room where Henry will spend the remainder of his week on a sofa bed that costs less than his monthly wine budget. Not poverty for its own sake, but connection to people and problems that matter. "I want to use the advantages you've given me to help create solutions, not just to accumulate more advantages for myself." By the fourth day of his week-long immersion, Henry's perspective has shifted in ways that 3 decades of business success never prepared him to experience. The transformation isn't sudden revelation, but gradual recognition that his assumptions about poverty, work, and human value require fundamental reconsideration. When Dr. Patricia Whitfield arrives unexpectedly at Rosa's apartment that Thursday evening, her presence represents validation that Henry never anticipated needing, but desperately welcomes from someone whose expertise he respects. Dr. Whitfield's visit stems from professional curiosity rather than social concern. As one of Manhattan's most respected family therapists, she has observed countless wealthy families struggle with children who reject privilege in favor of seemingly self-destructive choices. Henry's case intrigued her because Alexander's disappearance involved no apparent trauma, rebellion, or psychological crisis that typically motivate such dramatic departures from comfort and security. "Hey, Mr. Jordan," Dr. Whitfield says after observing the evening routine that has become Henry's new normal, "I've been tracking your family situation since Alexander's disappearance. What I'm witnessing here challenges every theoretical framework I use to understand adolescent behavior and family dynamics." Her professional assessment carries weight that Henry's own observations lack because Dr. Whitfield approaches human behavior through scientific methodology rather than emotional investment. She notes Alexander's confidence, emotional stability, and social integration with the analytical objectivity that wealthy clients expect from experts whose opinions influence major life decisions. Alexander demonstrates psychological health that contradicts every model we have for understanding children who abandon privilege. Dr. Whitfield continues, her voice carrying amazement that professional experience has rarely produced. "He shows none of the anxiety, depression, or identity confusion that typically accompanies such radical lifestyle changes. Instead, he exhibits purpose, community connection, and personal satisfaction that most of my clients struggle to achieve despite unlimited resources." Rosa listens to this professional validation with quiet satisfaction that doesn't require external confirmation, but appreciates recognition of what she has observed through daily interaction with Alexander. "Doctor," she says with respectful directness, "children need to feel useful, needed, and connected to something larger than themselves. Money can't buy those feelings. Sometimes wealth prevents them." Dr. Whitfield's research into similar cases reveals that Alexander's choice represents a growing phenomenon among children from extremely wealthy families who seek authenticity that their privileged environments cannot provide. "I've documented 17 cases in the past 5 years," she explains, where teenagers from families worth more than $50 million have deliberately chosen poverty, manual labor, or service work despite having access to unlimited educational and professional opportunities. This trend puzzles mental health professionals because it contradicts basic assumptions about human motivation and the relationship between material security and psychological well-being. Traditional therapeutic approaches assume that people seek to maximize comfort, status, and financial security. Children who deliberately choose hardship challenge these frameworks while demonstrating resilience and satisfaction that privileged environments often fail to produce. Henry, Dr. Whitfield says, using his first name with familiarity that professional relationships rarely develop, "Your son has accomplished something that most of my wealthy clients spend years trying to achieve through therapy, meditation retreats, and expensive spiritual guidance. He's found meaning, purpose, and authentic human connection. The question isn't whether he should return to your world, but whether your world has anything valuable to offer him." Her assessment forces Henry to confront the possibility that his life's work, building wealth to provide Alexander with opportunities and security, might have created barriers to the very fulfillment he intended to enable. The irony burns with particular intensity, because Henry's business success depends on understanding human motivation and market psychology, yet he failed to recognize his own son's psychological needs or the ways that wealth might limit rather than expand human experience. Alexander's response to Dr. Whitfield's presence reveals confidence that formal education and privileged upbringing never produced. He discusses his future plans with clarity that demonstrates mature consideration of long-term consequences, rather than impulsive reaction to family conflict. "I want to finish high school here, then study social work or community development," he explains with conviction that emerges from practical experience rather than academic theory. "I've learned that I'm good at connecting with people, understanding their problems, and helping them navigate systems that seem designed to exclude them." This career aspiration shocks Henry because it represents deliberate choice of lower social status and limited financial rewards in favor of work that Alexander finds meaningful. Social workers earn modest salaries while dealing with bureaucratic frustration and emotional demands that wealthy families typically avoid through private solutions to personal problems. Alexander's choice suggests values that Henry's education and experience never taught him to understand or appreciate. Dr. Whitfield recognizes the significance of Alexander's career plans because they demonstrate integration of privilege with purpose rather than rejection of advantages in favor of artificial poverty. Alexander isn't romanticizing working-class life or pursuing poverty as rebellion. She observes with professional insight that clarifies motivations Henry couldn't decode independently. He's developing a sophisticated understanding of how to use inherited advantages responsibly while maintaining authentic relationships with people from all economic backgrounds. Rosa's influence on Alexander's development becomes clear through Dr. Whitfield's analysis of their relationship dynamics. Rosa has provided something that wealth cannot purchase, the therapist explains while watching their interaction during dinner preparation. She's modeled dignity, community responsibility, and meaningful work while treating Alexander as family member rather than client or charity case. This relationship has taught him that value comes from character and contribution rather than inherited status or accumulated wealth. The validation Dr. Whitfield provides transforms Henry's understanding of Rosa from sympathetic poor person who helped his son to sophisticated educator whose wisdom exceeds formal credentials. Rosa's life choices: remaining in low-wage work despite obvious intelligence, maintaining community relationships despite individual hardship, treating Alexander as equal partner rather than privileged guest, demonstrate values that business schools don't teach and that wealthy social circles actively discourage. "Mr. Jordan," Dr. Whitfield concludes after observing their household dynamics for several hours, "your son has found something that most people spend their entire lives seeking. The question you need to answer is whether you're willing to learn from his discovery, or whether you'll continue trying to convince him that your definition of success should override his own experience of fulfillment." Her challenge presents Henry with recognition he never sought but cannot ignore from a professional authority whose expertise he respects. Alexander's choice isn't misguided teenage rebellion, but mature judgment about values and priorities that Henry's worldview never taught him to consider. The validation comes not from Henry's social circle or business associates, but from an objective professional whose opinion carries credibility that emotional appeals lack. As Dr. Whitfield prepares to leave, she offers Henry resources for understanding the psychological research behind Alexander's choice, while emphasizing that reconciliation requires fundamental changes in how he approaches relationship and definitions of success. Wealth creates opportunities, she says in parting, but it also creates isolation. Your son has chosen connection over comfort. Whether you can make the same choice will determine whether you remain part of his life. The final 3 days of Henry's week with Rosa and Alexander reveal complexities that his initial transformation couldn't prepare him for, challenges that test his commitment to understanding his son's world when the novelty of poverty tourism gives way to genuine hardship that threatens his business empire and social relationships. The crisis begins Friday morning when Apex Ventures faces a hostile takeover attempt that requires immediate strategic response, sophisticated legal maneuvering, and personal involvement that Henry's absence has made impossible to provide. Jonathan Mills, Henry's chief operating officer, delivers news that transforms Henry's educational experiment into potential financial catastrophe. "Henry, where the hell are you?" Mills demands through the cracked smartphone that Rosa has loaned him after his expensive device died from water damage during restaurant work. "Meridian Capital is moving against us. They've acquired 18% of our shares through shell companies, and they're planning a proxy fight for board control. If you don't get back here immediately, we could lose everything you've built over the past 20 years. The urgency in Mills' voice represents exactly the kind of emergency that Rosa had warned Henry would test his commitment to understanding poverty's realities. Poor people cannot abandon their responsibilities when crises arise, cannot delegate essential functions to subordinates, cannot hire consultants to manage problems that require personal attention. Yet Henry's business empire depends on immediate decision-making that his current circumstances make extremely difficult to provide. Rosa observes Henry's growing panic with the calm attention of someone who has watched wealthy people discover that money creates dependencies rather than independence. "Mr. Jordan," she says while he paces around her small kitchen, "this is what poor people face every day: medical emergencies, family crises, job losses that require immediate attention while they're working other jobs they can't afford to leave. The difference is that when poor people's lives fall apart, there's no safety net to catch them." Her perspective provides little comfort, as Henry faces the possibility that his educational experiment might cost him the company that provides his identity, social status, and financial security. The irony strikes him with painful clarity. While learning about the hardships that poverty creates, his temporary absence from wealth management threatens to make those hardships permanent rather than educational. Alexander watches his father's distress with emotions that combine sympathy with determination not to sacrifice his newfound authenticity for his father's business problems. "Dad," he says with maturity that his privileged upbringing never required him to develop, "this is exactly why I left. Your entire life revolves around money and business deals that don't help anyone except people who already have more than they need. When do you focus on relationships, community, or contributions that matter beyond quarterly profit reports?" The conflict between Henry's business obligations and his commitment to understanding Alexander's world creates tensions that neither Rosa's wisdom nor Dr. Whitfield's professional insights prepared him to navigate. He faces competing loyalties that force impossible choices: abandon his educational experiment and potentially lose his son permanently, or risk losing the financial foundation that makes his family's security possible. The situation deteriorates further when news of Henry's unusual absence reaches Manhattan's elite social circles, creating gossip that threatens business relationships built on perceptions of stability and reliability. Margaret Thornton, whose family foundation invests hundreds of millions through Apex Ventures, calls to express concerns that reflect broader anxiety among clients who expect complete dedication to wealth management rather than social experiments that suggest divided priorities. "Henry, darling," Margaret says with the patronizing concern that wealthy women use to disguise criticism as supportiveness, "everyone's worried about you. Living in some basement apartment, working at a restaurant. It sounds like you're having some sort of breakdown. Perhaps you should consider professional help before this affects your business judgment permanently." These conversations reveal the social isolation that wealth creates, the narrow range of acceptable behavior within elite circles, and the ways that privilege prevents understanding of experiences outside carefully maintained boundaries. Henry's former peers cannot comprehend motivations that would lead someone to voluntarily experience poverty, viewing his experiment as evidence of mental instability rather than genuine attempt to understand his son's perspective. Rosa helps Henry navigate these pressures by sharing stories from her own experience with families who struggled to balance competing demands without financial resources that make problems disappear. "When my husband died 10 years ago," she explains while preparing simple dinner that costs less than Henry's former daily coffee budget, "I had 3 jobs and 2 children to support. People told me I should quit one job to spend more time with my family, but quitting meant losing health insurance and risking eviction. Poor people don't get to choose between work and family. We have to find ways to manage both or lose everything." Her perspective helps Henry understand that his current crisis, while significant, differs fundamentally from the sustained pressure that poverty creates. His problems have solutions that money can purchase: hiring consultants, delegating responsibilities, or returning to his previous life if necessary. Rosa's challenges require daily navigation of competing demands without safety nets that wealth provides. But the most difficult aspect of Henry's final days in Rosa's apartment involves Alexander's growing concern that his father's business crisis will end their experiment prematurely, forcing return to patterns of relationship that prioritize financial success over emotional connection. "Dad," Alexander says during their last evening together, "I know your business is important, but if you leave now to save your company, you'll prove that money matters more to you than understanding who I've become." This ultimatum forces Henry to confront fundamental questions about priorities that his previous life never required him to examine. His success at Apex Ventures provided the resources that enabled Alexander's education, healthcare, and opportunities that poverty would have prevented. Yet that same success created emotional distance that drove Alexander to seek authenticity in circumstances that deliberately excluded financial advantages. The night before Henry must decide whether to return to Manhattan or complete his week-long commitment to understanding poverty's realities, he lies awake on Rosa's sofa bed contemplating changes that 7 days have produced in his worldview. He has discovered community relationships that his wealth had prevented him from developing, meaningful work that his corporate success had insulated him from experiencing, and personal satisfaction that his achievements had failed to provide. But he has also learned that poverty creates constraints that limit choices, opportunities, and security in ways that his privileged education never taught him to appreciate. Rosa's wisdom emerges from hardship that he would never choose for himself or his son, strength that develops through navigating circumstances that money should prevent rather than intentionally experience. As morning approaches and the deadline for critical business decisions arrives, Henry faces the ultimate test of whether his educational experiment represents genuine transformation or temporary tourism in authentic hardship that his wealth will ultimately rescue him from experiencing permanently. Saturday morning arrives with Henry's decision to stay, choosing his relationship with Alexander over Apex Ventures, when Rosa reveals information that recontextualizes everything he believed about his own identity and the foundations of his business success. While preparing breakfast in her small kitchen, she mentions casually that she worked for his family long before either Alexander or Henry knew of her existence, information that stops his morning routine as completely as if she had announced her ability to fly. "What do you mean you worked for my family?" Henry asks, his voice carrying confusion that transforms routine conversation into territory that neither of them had anticipated exploring. Rosa's expression reveals reluctance to discuss memories that she had deliberately avoided sharing, secrets that her employment with wealthy families taught her to protect rather than expose. "I cleaned houses in Westchester County for 15 years before taking the job at Whitmore Academy," Rosa explains with careful neutrality that doesn't quite mask emotional complexity underlying her words. "One of those houses belonged to Richard and Marie Jordan, your parents. I worked for them during the last 5 years of your father's life, when you were building your business and rarely visited." The revelation creates vertigo that Henry's week of poverty immersion hadn't prepared him to experience. His parents, who died within 6 months of each other when Alexander was 8 years old, had never mentioned employing Rosa or anyone matching her description. His memories of their Westchester estate include household staff, but he had paid minimal attention to people whose names and personal circumstances seemed irrelevant to family visits focused on business discussions and obligation fulfillment rather than emotional connection. Rosa continues with details that illuminate family history Henry never knew existed, relationships that his privileged perspective had rendered invisible. Your father spent his final months trying to contact you, she says with gentle directness that acknowledges painful truths without attempting to minimize their impact. He wanted to discuss things about your childhood, about mistakes he'd made as a parent, about wealth and what it had cost your family in terms of authentic relationships. Yakid. These attempted communications never reached Henry because his executive assistants filtered personal calls that might distract from business priorities, treating emotional conversations as inefficient interruptions to professional productivity. His parents' final illnesses occurred during Apex Ventures' most critical growth phase, when Henry believed that building financial security for Alexander's future justified sacrificing present-moment family relationships that death would soon make impossible to repair. Your father asked me to keep something for you, Rosa says, retrieving a small wooden box from her bedroom that contains items Henry hasn't seen since childhood. Inside lie photographs, letters, and documents that reveal family history his parents never shared with him directly. Stories that explain motivations and sacrifices that shaped his upbringing in ways he never understood. The photographs show Richard Jordan as a young man working construction jobs before starting the small contracting business that eventually provided middle-class stability for his family. The letters, written in his father's careful handwriting, describe fears about whether financial success would separate him from the working-class values that his own father had instilled through example rather than lecture. Documents reveal charitable contributions that Richard made anonymously, supporting families whose breadwinners were injured on construction sites, scholarships for children whose parents couldn't afford college tuition. Your father was terrified that wealth would make you forget where your family came from, Rosa explains while Henry examines evidence of generosity that his father never mentioned during their business-focused conversations. He grew up poor, built his company through hard work and treating employees fairly, but he worried that your success would eliminate the empathy and community connection that poverty had taught him to value. The letters reveal Richard's internal struggle between providing Henry with opportunities that his own childhood had lacked, while ensuring that privilege didn't create the emotional isolation that wealth often produces. He had deliberately avoided discussing his background because he wanted Henry to focus on building the future rather than dwelling on past hardships, but this silence had prevented transmission of values that connected success to social responsibility and authentic human relationships. Henry discovers that his business philosophy, identifying undervalued companies and supporting their growth through strategic investment, directly parallels his father's approach to construction projects, where Richard sought opportunities that other contractors overlooked while maintaining relationships with workers and clients based on mutual respect rather than pure profit maximization. The similarity hadn't occurred to Henry because he never knew enough about his father's actual business practices to recognize inherited approaches to problem-solving and human relationships. More shocking than these family revelations is Rosa's explanation of why she chose to help Alexander when she discovered him sleeping in Whitmore Academy's supply closet. "He reminded me of your father," she says with emotion that transforms her professional demeanor into something more personal and vulnerable. The same questions about fairness, the same discomfort with privilege that separates people from authentic relationships, the same hunger for meaningful work that helps others rather than just accumulating more advantages. Rosa had recognized in Alexander the values that Richard Jordan had tried to instill in his own son, qualities that Henry's focus on financial success had obscured but not eliminated. Alexander's rejection of privilege represented return to family values rather than abandonment of family identity, connection to heritage that wealth had concealed rather than rebellion against inherited advantages. "Your father made me promise to watch over your family if anything happened to him," Rosa continues, revealing the depth of relationship that extended beyond employment to genuine care and responsibility. "When your parents died, I thought my promise was fulfilled because you were successful and Alexander seemed well cared for. But when I found that boy sleeping in a closet, desperate to escape a life that felt empty despite material abundance, I realized your father's concerns had been justified." The revelation reframes Alexander's choice to live with Rosa not as random selection of sympathetic stranger, but as unconscious return to family connections that predated his birth, relationships that his parents had valued, but that Henry's focus on wealth accumulation had caused him to overlook or forget. Rosa's presence in Alexander's life represented continuity with heritage that Henry had unknowingly abandoned while building the empire that his father's values had made possible. Henry's week of experiencing poverty suddenly takes on different meaning, as he recognizes that his discomfort with isolation, his discovery of community satisfaction, and his growing appreciation for meaningful work all echo his father's values and concerns. His attraction to authentic relationships during his stay with Rosa reflects inherited traits that wealth had suppressed rather than eliminated, character qualities that could be recovered through deliberate choice rather than developed through painful experience. The wooden box contains one final item that completes Rosa's revelation, a letter addressed to Henry in his father's handwriting, sealed and marked, "To be opened when my son remembers what matters more than money." Inside, Richard Jordan's final words provide guidance that death had prevented him from delivering personally, wisdom that Rosa had preserved for the moment when Henry would be ready to receive it without dismissing it as outdated sentiment from someone who didn't understand modern business pressures and opportunities. Sunday evening brings the convergence of every element that has shaped Henry's transformative week when Jonathan Mills arrives at Rosa's apartment building with a team of corporate lawyers, private security personnel, and crisis management specialists, whose combined presence transforms the quiet residential street into a high-stakes battlefield where Henry's two worlds collide in ways that demand immediate resolution. The motorcade of black SUVs and luxury sedans creates a spectacle that draws neighbors to their windows, while Rosa's community watches wealthy outsiders invade their space with obvious intentions of extracting Henry from circumstances they cannot understand or approve. Mills storms up the narrow stairwell with corporate urgency that treats Rosa's apartment as hostile territory requiring swift invasion rather than respectful visitation. "Henry, thank God we found you," he announces without acknowledging Rosa or Alexander, his tone carrying relief mixed with barely controlled anger. Meridian Capital has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. They're proposing complete management restructuring that eliminates your position as CEO. If you don't appear with a comprehensive defense strategy, we lose everything. The dramatic intrusion represents exactly the kind of corporate dominance that Alexander has come to despise about his father's world, the assumption that wealth creates rights to interrupt, control, and override decisions that less powerful people make about their own lives. Rosa stands in her kitchen doorway with dignity that refuses to be intimidated by displays of professional authority designed to overwhelm opposition through superior resources rather than compelling arguments. "Mr. Mills," she says with calm firmness that cuts through corporate bluster like a blade through expensive fabric, "this is my home, and Mr. Jordan is my guest. If you want to speak with him, you'll show respect for my household and wait for invitation rather than barging in like you own the place." Her intervention forces acknowledgement of social dynamics that Henry's business world typically avoids confronting, where wealth assumes access and authority without considering consent or courtesy from people whose economic status provides no leverage for demanding better treatment. Mills' shocked expression reveals how rarely he encounters resistance from individuals whose cooperation cannot be purchased through employment relationships or business transactions. The corporate team's presence creates pressure that tests everything Henry has learned during his week of poverty immersion, while forcing him to choose between competing definitions of success that cannot be reconciled through compromise or negotiation. Meridian Capital's hostile takeover represents existential threat to business empire that provides his identity, social status, and financial security, yet responding to this crisis requires abandoning the experiment that could restore his relationship with Alexander permanently. Alexander watches this corporate invasion with expressions that combine disappointment with resignation, understanding that his father faces choices that will determine whether their week together produce genuine transformation or temporary performance designed to achieve specific emotional outcomes. "Dad," he says quietly while lawyers organize documents on Rosa's kitchen table, "this is exactly why I left. Your world doesn't allow time for relationships, community, or values that money can't measure. Even when you try to connect with me, business emergencies take priority over everything else." The accusation stings because Henry recognizes its accuracy while understanding that ignoring tomorrow's board meeting would indeed destroy everything he has built over 20 years of careful strategic planning and relationship development. Apex Ventures employs hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend on successful defense against corporate raiders, who view companies as assets to be acquired and optimized, rather than organizations that serve purposes beyond profit maximization. But Rosa's father's letter, which Henry finally opens while corporate lawyers debate legal strategies around her kitchen table, provides perspective that reframes the entire crisis in terms of values and priorities that wealth had caused him to forget. Richard Jordan's final words, written during his terminal illness when business concerns yielded to more fundamental questions about legacy and meaning, offer guidance that speaks directly to his son's current dilemma. Henry, the letter begins in handwriting that trembles with physical weakness but maintains emotional strength. If you're reading this, it means you've rediscovered what matters more than money. The business I built provided security for our family, but it was never the source of my identity or self-worth. Companies come and go, but relationships with people you love are the only investments that provide returns lasting beyond your lifetime. Richard's advice continues with specificity that addresses Henry's current situation with accuracy that seems almost prophetic. Someday you'll face a choice between saving your business and saving your soul. When that moment comes, remember that no amount of wealth can compensate for losing the people who matter most. Build another company if necessary, but don't sacrifice your family for financial success that means nothing without loved ones to share its benefits. The letter concludes with practical guidance that reflects Richard's understanding of both business realities and human priorities. Wealth is a tool, not a destination. Use it to create opportunities for others, to solve problems that matter, and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than economic advantage. Your real legacy won't be measured in dollars, but in the positive impact you have on lives that intersect with yours. This paternal wisdom provides Henry with clarity that corporate advisors cannot offer because it emerges from values that transcend quarterly earnings and market valuations. His father's perspective helps him understand that losing Apex Ventures, while financially catastrophic, wouldn't eliminate his ability to build something new that serves purposes aligned with recently rediscovered family values and community connections. Mills interrupts Henry's contemplation of his father's letter with final ultimatum that forces immediate decision about priorities that will determine the trajectory of his remaining years. Henry, we have exactly 12 hours to prepare a defense strategy that saves your company. Every minute you waste in this apartment increases Meridian's chances of success. Are you coming with us now, or are you choosing to let everything we've built together be destroyed by corporate raiders who don't share our vision? The choice Mills presents seems binary. Preserve business empire or maintain relationship with Alexander, continue corporate success or honor commitments to understanding poverty's realities, rescue financial achievements or embrace family values that wealth had obscured. But Henry's week with Rosa and Alexander has taught him that apparent either-or decisions often conceal third alternatives that creative thinking and value-based priorities can reveal. I'm staying, Henry announces with certainty that surprises everyone in Rosa's crowded kitchen, including himself. But I'm not abandoning Apex Ventures. I'm changing how I approach both business and family relationships, using this crisis as opportunity to build something better rather than just preserving what we've already created. His decision transforms corporate crisis into a defining moment where values inherited from his father guide strategy that neither purely business nor purely personal considerations could produce independently, setting the stage for resolution that honors both relationship commitments and professional responsibilities through approaches that wealth and poverty have each contributed to his understanding. Monday morning's emergency board meeting unfolds in Apex Ventures' marble-lined conference room where Henry appears via video link from Rosa's apartment, a decision that initially horrifies his corporate team but ultimately demonstrates leadership philosophy that transforms potential defeat into unprecedented victory. The stark contrast between the building's luxury and Rosa's modest kitchen creates visual metaphor that forces board members, investors, and hostile takeover architects to confront assumptions about where authentic business wisdom originates and how genuine leadership manifests under pressure. Meridian Capital's presentation, delivered by CEO Victoria Sterling with corporate precision designed to overwhelm opposition through superior financial resources and strategic positioning, outlines their vision for Apex Ventures restructuring that eliminates community investment programs, workforce development initiatives, and partnerships with small businesses that generate modest returns compared to pure profit maximization strategies. Their proposal transforms Apex from Henry's values-based investment firm into conventional wealth extraction operation that serves shareholder interests exclusively. Ladies and gentlemen, Sterling announces with confidence that comes from controlling 18% of outstanding shares plus proxy commitments from institutional investors seeking maximum quarterly returns. Apex Ventures has lost focus on its primary obligation to generate profits for stakeholders. Management's misguided emphasis on social responsibility and community development has reduced earnings potential that more aggressive strategies could unleash. But Henry's response, delivered from Rosa's kitchen table with Alexander and Rosa visible in the background, provides context for business philosophy that Sterling's purely financial analysis cannot comprehend or effectively counter. Board members. Henry begins with calm authority that his week of poverty immersion has strengthened rather than weakened. I want to tell you about the real source of Apex Ventures' success and why abandoning our values-based approach would destroy everything that makes our firm uniquely valuable to clients and communities. His presentation reveals how his father's working-class ethics and community responsibility principles have guided investment decisions that consistently outperformed market averages while creating positive social impact that conventional firms ignore. Henry explains how understanding genuine human needs, learned through direct experience with poverty and community relationships, enables identification of investment opportunities that purely financial analysis overlooks. 3 years ago, Henry continues while Rosa prepares coffee in the background, we invested in DataBridge technologies when larger firms dismissed their education software as insufficiently scalable for premium market segments. Our investment succeeded because we understood that solving real problems for underserved communities creates sustainable competitive advantages that elite-focused products cannot achieve. DataBridge is now worth 40 times our initial investment specifically because they prioritize accessibility alongside profitability. The board members' attention intensifies as Henry demonstrates how community engagement and authentic relationship building have produced superior investment returns through insights that isolation from diverse perspectives prevents competitors from recognizing. His week with Rosa and Alexander provided real-world validation of principles that his father had tried to teach through example rather than lecture. Alexander's presence during the video conference, introduced as Henry's son who chose poverty over privilege to learn about authentic community relationships, creates credibility that purely corporate presentations lack. My son taught me that wealth creates value only when it serves purposes larger than accumulation, Henry explains while Alexander nodded respectfully to board members who recognize genuine transformation rather than performance designed to achieve specific business outcomes. Rosa's quiet dignity during the conference call, acknowledged by Henry as the educator who helped him rediscover family values that his father had instilled but that business success had obscured, demonstrates leadership wisdom that MBA programs cannot teach. Her presence validates Henry's claim that understanding poverty and community needs enhances rather than undermines business judgment by providing perspective on market opportunities that privilege prevents recognizing. Dr. Patricia Whitfield's surprise appearance via conference call, requested by Henry to provide professional assessment of his psychological state and decision-making capacity, eliminates Meridian Capital's ability to characterize his choices as evidence of mental instability requiring corporate intervention. Mr. Jordan demonstrates enhanced judgment and emotional intelligence that his previous isolation from diverse perspectives had limited. She testifies with clinical objectivity that board members cannot dismiss as biased opinion. The turning point arrives when Henry announces Apex Ventures' new strategic direction that combines aggressive growth targets with expanded community investment programs, workforce development initiatives, and partnerships with organizations serving underserved populations. We're not choosing between profits and principles, he declares with conviction that his father's letter had reinforced. We're demonstrating that understanding human needs and community relationships produces superior returns while creating positive impact that conventional strategies cannot achieve. Margaret Thornton, whose family foundation represents one of Apex's largest clients, speaks first during board discussion following Henry's presentation. I've known Henry for 15 years, she says with growing enthusiasm that replaces her earlier concerns about his mental state. What I've witnessed today isn't breakdown, but breakthrough. His integration of social responsibility with financial performance represents exactly the kind of leadership that contemporary challenges require. Other board members express similar support as they recognize that Henry's transformation enhances, rather than threatens, Apex Ventures' competitive positioning in markets where environmental, social, and governance factors increasingly influence investment decisions. His authentic experience with poverty provides credibility that competitors cannot match through corporate social responsibility programs that lack genuine community engagement. Meridian Capital's hostile takeover attempt collapses when institutional investors withdraw proxy support, after recognizing that Henry's values-based approach offers superior long-term growth potential compared to short-term profit maximization strategies that damage company culture and community relationships. Sterling's final statement reveals corporate raiders' fundamental misunderstanding of what creates sustainable competitive advantage in contemporary business environments. This outcome defies conventional wisdom about effective business leadership. Sterling admits with frustration that emerges from discovering that authentic community engagement produces better financial results than purely transactional approaches to stakeholder relationships. Our analysis failed to account for the competitive advantages that genuine social responsibility provides in markets where consumer and investor values increasingly prioritize purpose alongside profit. The board's unanimous vote to reject Meridian's takeover bid while endorsing Henry's expanded community investment strategy validates his decision to prioritize family relationships and authentic human connections over pure financial considerations. Apex Ventures emerges from the crisis stronger than before, with enhanced credibility among clients who recognize that genuine leadership requires understanding diverse perspectives rather than isolation within elite circles. The victory celebration occurs not in corporate boardrooms or exclusive restaurants but in Rosa's apartment, where neighbors gather to congratulate Henry on business success that honors community values while achieving financial objectives. The contrast between this modest celebration and the luxury events that typically mark corporate victories demonstrates how Henry's priorities have evolved toward authenticity and genuine relationship building. Alexander's pride in his father's transformation exceeds any satisfaction he felt about academic achievements or social recognition during his privileged upbringing. "Dad, you proved that business success and community responsibility aren't competing priorities," he says with respect that their previous relationship had never produced. "You've shown that understanding real human needs makes you a better leader, not a weaker one." 6 months after the board meeting that transformed Apex Ventures from conventional investment firm into revolutionary model for value-based capitalism, Henry stands in the construction zone of the Jordan Community Development Center, watching concrete foundations take shape in the heart of Rosa's neighborhood, where his journey toward authentic leadership began. The building site occupies an entire city block that Apex Ventures purchased, not for gentrification or profit maximization, but for community empowerment, that demonstrates how business success can serve social justice while generating sustainable returns for investors who share long-term vision. The community center represents more than charitable gesture or public relations strategy. It embodies principles that Henry's father tried to instill decades earlier, values that Rosa preserved through years of service to wealthy families who rarely acknowledged her wisdom, and dreams that Alexander articulated through his choice to embrace poverty over privilege. The architectural plans spread across Henry's temporary construction office show facilities designed by community input rather than corporate mandate, job training programs, affordable childcare, financial literacy education, and small business incubation spaces that address authentic needs rather than imposed solutions. Rosa Martinez, now serving as Community Engagement Director for the Jordan Center, reviews morning reports that document progress exceeding every projection for participation, satisfaction, and measurable impact on neighborhood economic development. Her transition from custodial work to program leadership occurred naturally, as Apex Ventures recognized expertise that formal credentials couldn't validate, wisdom about community needs that academic training couldn't provide, and leadership abilities that traditional hiring practices systematically overlooked. Henry, Rosa says while examining enrollment data for the center's job training programs, "We have waiting lists for every course we offer. People want opportunities to improve their situations, but they need practical support that understands their real circumstances rather than theoretical solutions designed by people who've never experienced poverty." Her observation reflects broader transformation in how Apex Ventures approaches investment decisions, community partnerships, and business development strategies that prioritize authentic relationship building over transactional profit extraction. The firm's new community-based investment model has attracted attention from business schools, policy researchers, and corporate leaders, seeking alternatives to shareholder capitalism that serves narrow interests while ignoring broader social consequences. Alexander's role in this transformation extends beyond symbolic presence to substantive contribution that validates his decision to reject privilege in favor of meaningful work. Now enrolled at Columbia University's School of Social Work while maintaining residence in Rosa's apartment, He splits his time between academic study and hands-on community organizing that bridges theoretical knowledge with practical application. His undergraduate thesis, examining how wealthy families can use inherited advantages responsibly while maintaining authentic community connections, has attracted interest from foundation leaders and policy advocates who recognize fresh perspective on persistent social challenges. Dad, Alexander says during their weekly planning meetings at the construction site, the most important thing we've learned is that effective community development requires long-term commitment rather than short-term charity. People need opportunities to build their own solutions, not temporary assistance that maintains dependency while making donors feel generous. His insight reflects maturation that poverty immersion accelerated but privilege could never have produced, understanding that emerges from genuine relationships with people whose experiences differ dramatically from his own background. Alexander's friends from Washington Heights High School now work as paid interns at the Jordan Center, bringing street-level knowledge about community needs that supplement formal research and professional analysis. Henry's relationship with Alexander has evolved into a partnership that honors both their individual growth and their shared commitment to family values that Richard Jordan had tried to transmit across generations. Their evening conversations, which once focused on academic achievement and career preparation, now explore complex questions about wealth responsibility, community development, and the role that privilege should play in addressing systemic inequality. Holger, the penthouse apartment that once symbolized Henry's success, now serves as meeting space for foundation work and community organizing, rather than private retreat from urban realities. The expensive furnishings remain, but their purpose has shifted from displaying wealth to facilitating conversations about how resources can serve community needs. Alexander maintains his room there but spends most nights at Rosa's apartment, choice that represents preference rather than rejection of comfort. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, Henry's former housekeeper who witnessed Alexander's gradual estrangement from family privilege, observes their transformation with satisfaction that domestic workers rarely experience regarding wealthy employers. Mr. Jordan, she says during one of their conversations about household management that now includes community center logistics, your son helped you remember what your father knew about money being a tool rather than a goal. Some people never learn that lesson, no matter how much wealth they accumulate. Her perspective validates changes that external observers might dismiss as performance or temporary idealism unlikely to survive long-term pressures that wealth creates. But Henry's integration of community engagement with business strategy has produced financial returns that exceed previous performance, while creating social impact that conventional investment approaches cannot achieve. Apex Ventures, community development portfolio, inspired by lessons learned during Henry's week with Rosa and guided by Alexander's research into effective poverty alleviation strategies, has become a model for impact investing that other firms attempt to replicate without understanding the authentic community relationships that make such approaches successful. The firm's annual report now includes social impact metrics alongside financial performance data, demonstrating how understanding human needs enhances rather than limits investment returns. Dr. Patricia Whitfield's continued involvement with the Jordan family transition provides professional validation that their changes represent genuine transformation rather than temporary adjustment to crisis circumstances. Henry's integration of personal growth with professional responsibility demonstrates that individual healing can create broader social healing when people choose authenticity over image management. She observes while reviewing data about the community center's impact on neighborhood economic development. The most meaningful validation comes from Rosa's community, where Henry has earned respect through consistent presence and genuine contribution rather than charitable gestures designed to purchase social approval. The neighbors who once viewed his corporate motorcade with suspicion now treat him as family member whose success serves shared purposes rather than individual advancement. Rosa's evening routine, which first taught Henry about dignity and community responsibility, now includes reviewing applications for the scholarship program that will enable promising students from her neighborhood to attend college without accumulating debt that limits their post-graduation choices. The program, funded through Apex Ventures but administered by community leaders, ensures that educational opportunities serve community development rather than brain drain that removes talented individuals from neighborhoods that need their skills and leadership. Your father would be proud, Rosa tells Henry while they review scholarship applications that demonstrate academic achievement combined with community commitment. He understood that wealth creates responsibility to help others build better lives rather than obligation to accumulate more advantages for yourself. As evening settles over the construction site and city lights begin illuminating Manhattan's landscape, Henry reflects on the journey from impossible aspirations to authentic achievement, understanding that the greatest innovation has been creating systems that enable other families to avoid the isolation and emotional poverty that wealth had created in his own life. The Jordan Community Development Center stands as proof that when opportunity meets preparation, regardless of economic background, extraordinary transformation becomes possible not just for individuals but for entire communities. Honklid. The story concludes not with Henry's personal redemption but with his recognition that true wealth consists of relationships, purpose, and positive impact that extends beyond financial accumulation toward lasting change that honors both individual achievement and collective well-being, creating legacy measured in lives improved rather than dollars accumulated. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.